The space station Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between stars like a giant metal city. Ships from many different worlds docked at its ports every day. Inside the station, aliens from across the galaxy met to talk about trade and peace. The year was 2387, and humans had only recently been allowed to join this great gathering of worlds called the Galactic Federation. Kim Do-yoon stood at attention in the main meeting hall. He was 28 years old and had been a Marine for 10 years. His black uniform was perfect and his boots shined like mirrors. Do-hyun had fought in 3 wars on different planets and earned many medals for his bravery. Today he was assigned to protect the human diplomats during their meeting with the Velkari. The Velkari were the strongest military force in the galaxy. They had ruled over many worlds for 1,000 years. Their bodies looked like they were made of living crystal, and they had 4 arms instead of 2. Most aliens feared them, and humans were no different. Ambassador Park Ji-won sat at a long table with other human representatives. She was trying to negotiate a new trade agreement that would help Earth get the resources it needed. Across from her sat the Velkari delegation led by their military commander. Commander Thexvar was massive even by Velkari standards. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, and his crystal skin sparkled under the station lights. His 4 arms were thick as tree trunks and covered in sharp ridges that served as natural armor. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding stone. The meeting had been going well for 2 hours. Both sides seemed ready to reach an agreement that would benefit everyone. Do-hyun watched from his position near the wall, thinking that diplomatic work seemed much easier than fighting wars. Then, without any warning, Commander Thexvar stood up from his chair. His massive frame cast a shadow across the entire human section of the table. He walked slowly toward Do-hyun with heavy footsteps that echoed through the quiet hall. Do-hyun maintained his professional stance but felt tension building in the room. Other aliens stopped their conversations to watch what was happening. The human diplomats looked confused and worried. Thexvar stopped directly in front of the Marine. He looked down at Do-hyun with 4 cold eyes that showed no emotion. Then he raised one of his massive hands high above his head. The slap came down like a hammer blow. The sound cracked through the hall like a gunshot. Do-hyun felt his feet leave the ground as the force sent him sliding backward across the smooth floor. Pain exploded through his face and warm blood began flowing from his split lip. The hall fell completely silent. Every alien in the room turned to stare at what had just happened. Ambassador Park started to rise from her chair in protest, but Thexvar raised another hand to stop her. In broken English that he had learned for these meetings, Thexvar spoke loud enough for everyone to hear him clearly. He said that humans were nothing more than primitive animals pretending to be civilized. The slap, he explained, was meant to show everyone the difference between real warriors and weak creatures like humans. The other Velkari and their delegation began laughing at what their commander had done. Some of the aliens from different species nodded their heads in agreement. To them, this proved what they had always suspected about these newcomers from Earth. Do-hyun slowly pushed himself up from the floor. His left cheek was already starting to swell, and blood dripped from his mouth onto his clean uniform. Every muscle in his body wanted to fight back, but his military training kept him under control. Marines were taught to follow orders and protect diplomats, not start wars in meeting halls. He returned to his position against the wall and stood at attention again. His dark eyes burned with anger, but he kept his face blank and professional. The other human guards watched him with respect and worry. They all wanted to help their fellow Marine, but knew that any action could make things much worse. Thexvar returned to his seat, looking satisfied with what he had accomplished. The meeting continued as if nothing important had happened. Other aliens began talking about trade and politics again while Do-hyun stood bleeding in the corner. But the Marine was not just standing there. His mind was working fast as he thought about what had just happened and what it meant. In all his years of military service, he had never been humiliated like this in front of so many people. More importantly, he realized that this was not really about him at all. The commander had not slapped Kim Do-hyun the person. He had slapped humanity itself. Every human watching would remember this moment. Every alien in the room would tell others about how weak humans really were. This single act of violence was meant to put Earth in its proper place at the bottom of the galactic order. As the meeting ended, and delegates began leaving the hall, Do-hyun remained at his post. His fellow Marines approached him with concern, but he waved them away. He needed time to think about what came next. The station had a huge digital library that contained information about every species in the Federation. As soon as his duty shift ended, Do-hyun went straight there to begin researching everything he could find about Velkari culture and military traditions. Other humans on the station had already heard about what happened in the meeting hall. Some felt sorry for Do-hyun while others were angry at the Velkari. But most agreed that nothing could be done about it. Humans were still new to galactic politics and could not afford to make enemies of powerful species like the Velkari. Do-hyun spent the next few hours reading everything the library had about Velkari history, law, and customs. Most of it seemed useless until he found something interesting in their military codes. The Velkari had ancient laws about honor and combat that went back thousands of years. As he read deeper into these old traditions, Do-hyun began to see a possible path forward. It would be dangerous and probably stupid, but it might be the only way to restore honor to humanity and show the galaxy that humans were not as weak as they appeared. The Marine closed the library files and walked back to his quarters. Tomorrow, he would begin planning something that had never been tried before in the history of the Galactic Federation. He would use the Velkari own laws against them to demand satisfaction for the insult he had received. 3 days passed since Commander Thexvar had humiliated the human Marine in front of the entire galactic diplomatic community. News of the incident spread throughout Nexus Prime like wildfire through dry grass. In the entertainment districts, aliens gathered in bars and restaurants to laugh about the weak humans who could not even defend their own soldiers. Velkari warriors boasted loudly about their commander's demonstration of superiority over the pathetic creatures from Earth. They told anyone who would listen that this proved humans did not belong in the Federation with real civilized species. Other aliens nodded in agreement, believing that the newcomers had been put in their proper place. But Kim Do-hyun was not sitting around feeling sorry for himself. Every free moment he had was spent in the station's massive digital library researching Velkari culture and history. His fellow Marines Corporal Lee Sung-min and Private Choi Min-jae tried to convince him to let the matter rest. Sung-min was Do-hyun's closest friend and had served with him in 2 previous wars. He understood the Marines' anger but worried about what might happen if he tried to get revenge. The corporal argued that fighting back could destroy Earth's chances of being accepted as a full member of the Federation. Min-jae was younger and newer to military service, but he had good instincts about politics. The private pointed out that humans were already seen as inferior by most alien species. Any aggressive action could be used as proof that they were too primitive and violent to be trusted with advanced technology. Do-hyun listened to his friend's concerns, but continued his research. Anyway, deep in the Velkari historical records he found references to something called the Korthak. This was an ancient code of military honor that governed how disputes between warriors should be resolved. The code was thousands of years old and had been written when the Velkari were still fighting wars with swords and shields instead of energy weapons and starships. But it had never been officially abolished and was still considered valid law throughout their empire. According to the Korthak, any physical contact between warriors automatically constituted a challenge to combat. The warrior who initiated the contact was required to face the consequences of that challenge regardless of the species or social rank of their opponent. Refusing to honor a properly issued challenge brought eternal shame upon the warrior's entire family line. But the most interesting part of the ancient law was what happened after a challenge was accepted. If the challenged warrior could prove their superior combat ability, they gained the right to demand satisfaction from their opponent's commanding officer. This chain of responsibility continued upward through the entire military hierarchy, until someone accepted personal defeat. Do-hyun printed out every document he could find about the Korthak and took them to Ambassador Park Ji-won. The diplomat was busy trying to repair the damage done by the slapping incident and did not want to hear about ancient Velkari military codes. Park argued that humans could not afford to engage in primitive displays of violence when their species was still trying to prove itself worthy of Federation membership. She reminded Do-hyun that Earth had worked for decades to gain acceptance into the galactic community, and one Marine's wounded pride was not worth risking all that progress. But Do-hyun had done his homework thoroughly. He showed the ambassador evidence that the Valkyrie interpreted any sign of weakness or restraint as proof of inferiority. The slapping incident was already being used by other species as evidence that humans did not deserve respect in galactic politics. More importantly, he had discovered that the Federation Charter specifically recognized traditional military codes from all member species as valid legal frameworks. This meant that humans had the same right to invoke the Korthak as any Valkyrie warrior would have. The breakthrough came when Do-hyun found a legal precedent from 50 years earlier. A warrior from the Zenthari Empire had successfully used similar, ancient codes to challenge a Valkyrie general who had insulted his species during trade negotiations. The case had been upheld by Federation courts, and the Zenthari had won both the combat and significant political concessions. Ambassador Park realized that Do-hyun might have found a legitimate way to address the insult without appearing to start a fight. If the challenge was issued properly under recognized legal codes, the Valkyrie would be forced to respond or face accusations of cowardice from other Federation members. She contacted the Federation Legal Council to verify that the Korthak could be invoked by human citizens. The response came back within hours, confirming that all Federation members had equal rights under traditional military codes, regardless of their species or how recently they had joined. After consulting with military commanders on Earth, Park made her decision. She would allow Do-hyun to formally invoke the Korthak against Commander Thexfar. The legal challenge would be delivered through official Federation channels, making it impossible for the Valkyrie to claim ignorance or dismiss it as an unofficial personal dispute. The implications were staggering to consider. If Do-hyun succeeded in defeating Thexfar, he could theoretically challenge his way up the entire Valkyrie military structure. The chain of command led directly to their supreme military leader, King Warthog himself. Master Sergeant Han Kyuho arrived from Earth to help prepare Do-hyun for what was coming. Kyuho was a Special Forces veteran who had spent 20 years studying alien combat techniques in preparation for exactly this kind of situation. He understood that this was about much more than one Marine's personal honor. As news of the formal challenge spread throughout the station, the reaction was immediate and dramatic. Most aliens considered it either the desperate gesture of a humiliated primitive or the beginning of something that could change galactic politics forever. The Valkyrie High Command initially dismissed the challenge as a joke. But their own legal advisors confirmed that the Korthak had been properly invoked and could not be refused without violating centuries of sacred military tradition. Commander Thexfar was forced to accept the challenge or face exile from Valkyrie society. The combat was scheduled to take place in the station's ancient arena, which had not been used for over 50 years. Do-hyun began intensive training, knowing that he would be fighting for more than his own life. The outcome of this battle would determine how humans were treated by every alien species in the galaxy. Success would prove that Earth deserved respect, while failure would confirm their status as inferior beings. The ancient combat arena on Nexus Prime had been sealed for 53 years, when the Federation banned gladiatorial contests between species. Now, maintenance crews worked around the clock to prepare the circular chamber for what promised to be the most watched interspecies battle in galactic history. The arena was built to accommodate warriors from many different worlds. Its floor was made from a special metal that could absorb energy weapons, while its walls rose 30 feet high to protect spectators. Lighting systems bathed the fighting space in bright white light that eliminated shadows and hiding places. Kim, Do-hyun stood in the center of the arena during a practice session, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Master Sergeant Han Kyuho watched from the sidelines, taking notes on everything from the floor's traction to the way sound echoed off the curved walls. Kyuho had spent weeks analyzing every piece of available footage showing Valkyrie combat techniques. The Special Forces veteran understood that this fight would not be won through brute strength or traditional military tactics. Success would require exploiting weaknesses that the Valkyrie did not even know they possessed. The two men worked together, 18 hours a day, developing strategies that played to human advantages in speed, adaptability, and tactical thinking. They studied the way Valkyrie moved, how they reacted to different types of attacks, and where their crystal skin armor was strongest and weakest. Dr. Yoon Sulgi, arrived from Earth with critical intelligence about Velkari biology and psychology. The xenobiologist had performed detailed analysis of tissue samples obtained through previous diplomatic exchanges. Her research revealed that Velkari crystal skin, while incredibly durable, had specific vulnerability points where the formations joined together. More importantly, she discovered that Velkari psychology was based on dominance hierarchies established through displays of superior strength. They expected opponents to either submit immediately or engage in predictable patterns of direct confrontation. Unconventional tactics confused them and disrupted their decision-making processes. Meanwhile, Commander Thexfar and his supporters treated the entire situation as an elaborate entertainment. The Velkari commander publicly boasted about how easily he would crush this presumptuous human who dared to challenge a superior warrior. He gave interviews to Galactic news networks describing the many ways he planned to humiliate his opponent. This overconfidence was exactly what Do-hyun and his team had hoped for. Arrogant opponents made tactical mistakes and failed to prepare properly for unexpected challenges. Thexfar was so certain of victory that he refused advice from his own military advisors about studying human combat methods. Captain Nam Jae-ho arrived to ensure that Federation regulations were strictly enforced during the combat. Do-hyun's commanding officer understood that any irregularities could be used to discredit not just a potential victory, but humanity's entire legitimacy within the Federation. Every detail had to be perfect, from the weapons inspections to the medical examinations. The combat would be broadcast live to billions of beings across the galaxy and recorded for historical archives. There could be no questions about fairness or proper procedures. As the date approached, betting pools opened throughout Nexus Prime. The odds heavily favored the Velkari commander, with some bookmakers offering 50-1 against the human Marine. These numbers reflected widespread belief that humans, despite their technological achievements, lacked the physical capabilities to compete with established warrior races. But a few experienced gamblers noticed something interesting in the betting patterns. Small amounts of money were being placed on the human by individuals who had access to classified military information. Someone who knew more than the general public was quietly confident that Do-hyun had a real chance. The arena began, filling with spectators 3 hours before the scheduled combat time. Representatives from dozens of species claimed seats in the viewing galleries, while millions more watched through live broadcasts. This was being called the fight that would determine humanity's place in galactic society. Ambassador Park Ji-won took her place in the diplomatic section, knowing that her career and possibly Earth's future in the Federation depended on what happened in the next hour. She had made the decision to support Do-hyun's challenge, but now wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. In the preparation chamber beneath the arena, Do-hyun went through his final equipment checks. He wore standard Federation-approved combat gear that had been inspected multiple times to ensure no illegal modifications or enhancements. Everything he carried was available to any warrior regardless of species or technology level. Kyuho offered last-minute tactical advice, while Dr. Yoon reminded him of the specific vulnerability points she had identified in Velkari anatomy. But both advisors knew that once the combat began, Do-hyun would be completely on his own, facing an opponent who possessed superior strength, speed, and natural armor. The Marine closed his eyes and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation in the diplomatic meeting, the long hours of research and preparation, the weight of representing his entire species in mortal combat. Win or lose, he had already achieved something unprecedented by forcing the galaxy to take humanity seriously. When the arena announcer called his name, Do-hyun walked through the entrance tunnel toward the fighting floor. Behind him, he left the safety of human protection and understanding. Ahead lay either glory or death at the hands of the galaxy's most feared warrior race. The crowd noise was deafening as both fighters entered the arena. Commander Thexfar raised all four arms to acknowledge the cheers of his supporters, while Do-hyun simply walked to his designated starting position. The contrast between the two warriors was stark, with the massive crystalline alien towering over the much smaller human. Federation. Officials made final announcements about combat rules and victory conditions. Medical teams stood ready to intervene if either fighter suffered life-threatening injuries. Security forces surrounded the arena to prevent any interference from partisan spectators. As the final countdown began, Do-hyun felt a strange calm settle over him. All the preparation and planning had led to this single moment of truth. In the next few minutes, he would either validate humanity's claim to respect or confirm their status as inferior beings, unworthy of galactic citizenship. The victory over Commander Thexvar sent shockwaves through the Velkari military command that reached all the way to their home world. For the first time in over 1,000 years, one of their warriors had been defeated in honorable single combat by a member of another species. The implications threatened to shake the foundation of everything they believed about their own superiority. General Caxthor received word of his subordinate's defeat while commanding a battle fleet in the outer territories. The message seemed impossible to believe at first. Thexvar was one of their most accomplished warriors with centuries of combat experience and an unbroken record of victories against opponents from dozens of different species. But the combat had been broadcast live across the entire galaxy and recorded for historical archives. There could be no denying what billions of beings had witnessed with their own eyes. A human marine had systematically dismantled one of the Velkari Empire's most respected military leaders, using tactics that no one had seen before. Under the ancient laws of Korthak that Thexvar had foolishly invoked, General Caxthor was now required to face the victorious challenger or bring eternal shame upon his family bloodline. The general initially attempted to refuse, arguing that primitive codes should not apply to modern interspecies conflicts. But the Federation Legal Council had already ruled that traditional military laws from all member species remained valid, regardless of how old they were or how circumstances had changed. The Korthak was recognized as legitimate legal framework and could not be ignored without serious diplomatic consequences. Kim Do-hyun spent the week between challenges studying intelligence reports about his new opponent provided by Lieutenant Park Sun-woo, the expedition's military analyst. General Caxthor represented a far more dangerous challenge than Commander Thexvar, with over 3 centuries of combat experience and tactical genius that had conquered entire star systems. The second combat was scheduled to take place in the same arena but with much higher security due to increased tensions throughout the galactic community. Some species saw Do-hyun's victories as proof that humans deserved greater respect, while others worried about the implications of upsetting established power structures. Ambassador Park found herself managing an unprecedented diplomatic crisis as representatives from across the galaxy demanded to know humanity's ultimate intentions. Many aliens suspected that Earth was using these combats as part of some larger strategy to challenge existing hierarchies and claim greater political influence. But Do-hyun remained focused on the immediate challenge ahead of him. General Caxthor was everything the intelligence reports had claimed and more. Unlike his arrogant subordinate, the general approached this combat with careful preparation and genuine respect for his opponent's demonstrated abilities. The battle began with both warriors testing each other's capabilities through cautious probing attacks. Caxthor had studied footage of the previous fight and understood that traditional Velkari tactics would be inadequate against this human opponent. He adapted his approach to account for Do-hyun's unconventional fighting methods. What followed was a chess match of move and counter-move as each warrior sought to find weaknesses in the other's defenses without committing to potentially fatal mistakes. The general matched Do-hyun's tactical creativity with centuries of accumulated wisdom about combat strategy and psychological warfare. For over an hour, the two fighters circled each other in a deadly dance that showcased the highest levels of military skill from both species. The crowd watched in fascination as human adaptability met Velkari experience in a display of martial prowess that redefined what interspecies combat could achieve. But once again, Do-hyun's training in asymmetric warfare proved decisive. Where Velkari doctrine relied on established patterns and time-tested techniques, human military philosophy emphasized improvisation and creative problem-solving. The Marine introduced tactics that General Caxthor had never encountered in 3 centuries of warfare. The victory over General Caxthor created panic within the Velkari High Command as the full implications of the challenge chain became clear. The next level of responsibility belonged to Admiral Vextarn, Supreme Commander of all Velkari military forces and personal advisor to King Warthog himself. For the first time in their species' history, the possibility existed that a non-Velkhari warrior could potentially challenge their absolute ruler. The very thought was so unprecedented that many Velkhari leaders refused to acknowledge it as a real possibility, even as their own legal experts confirmed the validity of the ancient codes. Admiral Vextarn was a legendary figure even among the warrior-obsessed Velkhari culture. He had spent 300 years perfecting his combat abilities and strategic thinking, while conquering more worlds than any other military leader in galactic history. His personal combat record included victories over champions from every major species in the Federation. The announcement that Admiral Vextarn would personally enter the arena to face the human challenger created the largest gathering of spectators in Nexus Prime history. Representatives from hundreds of species arrived to witness what everyone assumed would be either humanity's greatest triumph or the restoration of proper galactic order. Colonel Won Junho arrived from Earth specifically to observe this climactic confrontation. His presence represented official recognition from humanity's military leadership that this single Marine's actions had implications far beyond personal honor or species pride. The outcome would determine how humans were perceived and treated by every intelligent species in the galaxy. Do-hyun entered his most intensive preparation period, yet knowing that Admiral Vextarn represented the absolute pinnacle of Velkhari military evolution. Master Sergeant Kyuho worked with him around the clock, developing new strategies and tactics that might give a human warrior even the smallest chance against such a formidable opponent. The pressure was enormous, but Do-hyun had evolved as well through his previous victories. Each combat had taught him new lessons about Velkhari psychology and his own capabilities. He no longer fought as a human trying to match alien abilities, but as the representative of everything that made humanity unique in the galaxy. As the date of the third combat approached, betting establishments throughout Federation space struggled to set odds for what had become the most watched sporting event in galactic history. The smart money remained on Admiral Vextarn, but the margins had shifted dramatically since that first impossible victory over Commander Thexvar. Behind the scenes, Velkhari political leaders desperately searched for legal alternatives that might end the challenge chain before it reached their ultimate ruler. But the ancient laws were explicit and allowed no exceptions or escape clauses. The chain of command led directly to King Warthok, and every step along the way had been properly invoked. Admiral Vextarn entered the arena 3 weeks later, carrying with him the accumulated combat wisdom of 3 centuries and the desperate hopes of an entire galactic empire. The legendary Velkhari warrior had never been defeated in personal combat, and had conquered more worlds than any other military leader in Federation history. The arena was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Real-time broadcasts reached billions of viewers across hundreds of worlds as beings everywhere gathered to witness what promised to be the most significant interspecies confrontation in recorded history. Kim Do-hyun walked onto the fighting floor, knowing that he carried the hopes and fears of all humanity on his shoulders. The Marine had evolved far beyond the soldier who had been slapped in a diplomatic meeting just weeks earlier. Each victory had transformed him into something new, a symbol of human potential that even he did not fully understand. Colonel Won Junho watched from the military section with a mixture of pride and apprehension. His regimental commander had arrived from Earth specifically to witness this climactic battle that would determine humanity's place in galactic society for generations to come. Admiral Vextarn was everything the legends claimed and more. His crystal armor had been forged in battles across 100 worlds, and his 4 arms moved with the precise efficiency of a warrior who had spent 3 centuries perfecting his deadly craft. When he looked at Do-hyun, his ancient eyes showed no emotion, only the cold calculation of a predator evaluating prey. The opening moments of combat demonstrated immediately why Admiral Vextarn was considered the greatest warrior in Velkhari history. His techniques transcended anything Do-hyun had previously encountered, combining overwhelming physical ability with tactical genius and psychological warfare methods developed over centuries of conquest. Unlike his subordinates, Vextarn did not underestimate his human opponent or rely on traditional attack patterns. He had studied recordings of both previous fights and developed specific counter-strategies for every technique Do-hyun had displayed. The Admiral fought like a master chess player, anticipating moves several steps ahead. For the first time since beginning his challenge chain, Do-hyun found himself genuinely overmatched. Admiral Vextarn's combat skills were so advanced that conventional tactics seemed useless against them. The human marine was forced to dig deeper than ever before into reserves of creativity and determination he had not known existed. The battle became a grueling test of endurance skill and willpower that pushed both warriors to their absolute limits. Vextarn pressed his advantages ruthlessly, while Do-hyun fought desperately for survival, using every lesson learned from his previous victories and 3 wars' worth of military experience. What saved the human marine was something that no amount of Valkyrie combat training could prepare an opponent for. Do-hyun stopped trying to fight like a warrior from any established tradition and began fighting like a human being facing impossible odds with nothing left to lose. He abandoned all conventional tactics and began using pure improvisation combined with psychological warfare that targeted Valkyrie cultural assumptions about honor and proper combat behavior. The admiral found himself facing an opponent who refused to follow any recognizable patterns or engage according to established rules. The turning point came when Vextarn attempted to execute his species' most devastating combat technique, a 4-armed assault pattern that had never been successfully countered in recorded Valkyrie military history. The admiral committed fully to this ultimate attack, believing that no opponent could survive its overwhelming power. But Do-hyun had been studying Valkyrie combat philosophy during every free moment between challenges. He understood that their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The rigid adherence to traditional methods that made their actions predictable to someone willing to think outside established frameworks. Instead of attempting to block or dodge the unstoppable assault, Do-hyun did something that violated every principle of civilized combat. He used Admiral Vextarn's own momentum and commitment to the traditional technique against him, turning the attack into an opportunity for a counterstrike that no Valkyrie warrior would have attempted. The decisive blow landed precisely where Dr. Yoon's research had predicted it would be most effective. Admiral Vextarn collapsed to the arena floor, his legendary combat skills finally overcome by an opponent who fought according to rules that existed nowhere in galactic military tradition. The crowd fell completely silent as the impossible happened for the 3rd time. The greatest warrior in Valkyrie history had been defeated by a human marine who had started this journey as nothing more than a humiliated guard at a diplomatic meeting. But victory over Admiral Vextarn brought implications that staggered even those who had witnessed the previous impossible triumphs. Under the ancient laws of Korthak, the chain of challenge now reached its ultimate conclusion. King Warthok himself was required to either accept personal combat or acknowledge the superiority of his challenger. For the first time in Valkyrie history, their absolute ruler faced the possibility of being dragged into an arena by a member of another species. The king, who had ruled over dozens of worlds for centuries, would have to choose between violating his species' most sacred military traditions or risking everything in personal combat. King Warthok's advisors worked frantically to find legal alternatives that might preserve their monarch's dignity, while avoiding the catastrophic humiliation of potential defeat. But Federation legal experts confirmed that no exceptions existed within the Korthak Code regardless of political rank or social status. The announcement that King Warthok had reluctantly accepted the challenge created a diplomatic crisis that reached every corner of the galaxy. Never before had the supreme ruler of a major galactic power been forced into personal combat by the actions of a single individual from another species. As preparations began for what promised to be the most watched event in galactic history, Kim Do-hyun realized that he had already achieved something unprecedented. Regardless of the final outcome, humanity had forced the most powerful military species in the Federation to acknowledge them. The arena erupted in noise as the combat began, but Kim Do-hyun heard none of it. His entire focus was locked on Commander Thexvar, who approached with the confident swagger of a warrior who had never known defeat. The Valkyrie commander's 4 arms moved in practice patterns, preparing for the devastating assault that had crushed hundreds of opponents over the centuries. Thexvar opened the fight exactly as Dr. Yoon's research had predicted. He launched into the traditional Valkyrie attack sequence designed to overwhelm opponents through sheer physical dominance. His 4 massive fists created a whirlwind of devastating strikes that came from multiple angles simultaneously. The first exchange went exactly as every spectator expected. Do-hyun barely managed to avoid the worst of the initial assault, but several glancing blows sent him rolling across the arena floor. The impact of crystal knuckles against his protective gear created sounds like hammers hitting anvils. The crowd roared its approval as the human Marine scrambled to his feet, only to be knocked down again by a perfectly timed combination attack. To most observers, this looked like the beginning of a quick and predictable victory for the Valkyrie commander. But Master Sergeant Kyuho watched with growing satisfaction from the preparation area. Everything was proceeding according to their carefully developed plan. Do-hyun was not trying to match his opponent's strength or stand toe-to-toe in direct confrontation. Instead, he was gathering intelligence and waiting for the right opportunity. Each exchange provided valuable data about Thexvar's attack patterns, reaction times, and defensive instincts. The Marine's training in asymmetric warfare taught him that smaller forces could defeat larger ones by avoiding their strengths and exploiting their weaknesses. As the combat continued, Do-hyun began making subtle adjustments to his defensive positioning. He started anticipating the commander's attacks just slightly better each time. His movement patterns became more efficient as he learned to waste less energy avoiding strikes that would miss anyway. The turning point came during the fifth major exchange when Thexvar committed to his most devastating combination attack. The commander put all his strength behind a four-armed assault that should have ended the fight immediately, but Do-hyun was no longer where the attack was aimed. The human Marine had studied hours of combat footage showing this exact sequence. He knew precisely when Thexvar would be most committed to the attack and unable to adjust his aim. At the critical moment, Do-hyun stepped sideways and delivered a precise strike to one of the joint formations where the commander's crystal armor connected. The impact sent hairline fractures through the crystalline structure, causing visible damage for the first time in the fight. More importantly, it caused Thexvar genuine pain, something he had not experienced in combat for over a decade. The commander's confident expression changed to one of surprise and concern. The crowd reaction shifted dramatically as spectators realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The small human warrior was not just surviving against overwhelming odds, he was actually fighting back effectively against one of the galaxy's most feared military leaders. Do-hyun immediately capitalized on his success by abandoning any pretense of defensive fighting. He launched into an aggressive assault pattern that Kyuho had developed specifically for this situation. The strategy focused on mobility precision and psychological warfare rather than brute force confrontation. The Marine used every feature of the arena to his advantage. He bounced off walls to change direction unexpectedly and used the lighting system to create temporary blind spots in his opponent's vision. Most importantly, he targeted the same crystal joint formations, repeatedly causing cumulative damage that began to seriously impair Thexvar's combat effectiveness. What followed was a masterclass in human tactical adaptation. Every lesson learned from 3 interplanetary wars came together in a display of creative problem-solving that left alien spectators speechless. Do-hyun fought like no warrior they had ever seen, using techniques that violated every established principle of honorable combat. But effectiveness mattered more than honor, and the human approach was devastatingly effective. Thexvar found himself constantly off balance fighting an opponent who refused to follow predictable patterns or engage according to established conventions. The Valkyrie commander's frustration grew with each passing minute, as his traditional techniques proved increasingly inadequate. His four-armed advantage became meaningless when his opponent was never in the same place, long enough for multiple strikes to connect simultaneously. Desperation began to creep into Thexvar's tactics as he realized that brute force was not going to win this fight. He abandoned his disciplined approach and began throwing wild haymaker punches that left him vulnerable to counterattacks from unexpected angles. The final sequence arrived suddenly and decisively. Thexvar made the critical error of attempting an all-out assault when his damaged armor had reduced his mobility and reaction speed. Do-hyun sidestepped the clumsy attack and delivered a series of precisely aimed strikes to crystal formations that were already compromised by previous damage. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the arena, as key structural points in the commander's natural armor gave way under repeated precise impacts. Thexvar stumbled backward with two of his forearms hanging uselessly at his sides and cracks spreading across his torso armor. Unable to continue fighting effectively, the Velkhari commander made one last desperate attempt to grab his opponent and crush him through sheer strength. But Do-Yun was ready for this final gambit and used Thexvar's momentum against him to send the massive alien crashing to the arena floor. Commander Thexvar lay motionless with his crystal armor cracked and broken while Kim Do-Yun stood over him breathing heavily but victorious. The arena fell completely silent as the impossible became reality before the eyes of billions of galactic citizens. For the first time in Velkhari military history, one of their commanders had been defeated in single combat by a member of another species. More importantly, that species was humanity, which most aliens had dismissed as primitive and unworthy of respect. The victory sent shockwaves throughout galactic society as the implications became clear. Under the ancient laws of Korthok that Thexvar himself had invoked, Do-Hyun now had the right to challenge the commander's superior officer. The chain of responsibility led directly up the Velkhari military hierarchy toward their ultimate leader,